Hello and welcome to this lab demonstration on deploying a container application that runs in a vSphere pod. At the beginning of this lab, we already need to be familiar with the general concept of VMware vSphere with Tanzu. In this lab, we are going to deploy a vSphere pod, and after that, we will view the deployed vSphere pod. I'm sure I provided you enough good reasons to watch the following video on deploying a container application that runs in a vSphere pod. So let's get started. At first, we are going to use the kubectl CLI to deploy a vSphere pod that runs a container application. So for doing that, we need to connect to our SA CLI VM developer workstation, and then we need to connect to our vSphere environment by using kubectl set of commands. So let's begin with typing kubectl set of commands. We're going to log into our vSphere environment by using vSphere login. Now we need to specify the server, our control plane IP address of our cluster. In our case here, it's 192.168.30.33. We can always check this IP address in our vSphere client on the workload management page on the clusters tab. And then we need to specify the user which we are going to use to connect to this environment. In our case, it's devops01 at vSphere.local user. We need to provide the password of this user. And now we are successfully connected to the vSphere Tanzu environment. Now we're going to verify that we are connected to the namespace 01 context. We can always use the command which template is provided here, kubectl config use context. And we need to provide the name of our namespace, which is in our case is namespace 01. Namespace 01. Namespace. So we are switched to the particular context, and now we are going to deploy a new pod. The specification of this pod, or I should say the deployment YAML file, is provided in a specific directory. Let's check that file by using cat utility, and we need to provide a path to the deployment file, which is root/lab7/nginx deployment YAML. In this file, we can see some information about the pod which we are required to deploy. So here we can see that we are going to launch a specific container in this pod. We're going to call it nginx. It is based on the image which is provided in our registry as 172.20.10.30 nginx with a version of 1.16. And we are going to use as the container port the TCP port 80. So now we are going to use this deployment YAML file as the configuration file for our requested container. Let me clear the screen. And now we're going to deploy it by using the following command, kubectl apply. Now we are going to use the -f key to specify the path and the file of our deployment YAML file. So it's going to be root/lab7/nginx deployment YAML. So let's execute this command. So the deployment is created. Let's verify its existence by typing kubectl get deployments. Now we see that our nginx deployment is actually used. We see its state, ready 1 out of 1. If we do not see this particular state, we may wait for a couple of seconds. We have typed kube get deployments too fast. too early, so after waiting for a couple of seconds we need to repeat this command to see the actual state is 1 out of 1. So our deployment is ready. Let's verify, let's see the list of pods in this particular deployment. So let's use kubectl get pods. Now we see one particular pod in this particular deployment. It is called nginx deployment, and the assigned number or ID, I should say, of this particular container, its status is, of this particular pod, I'm sorry, its status is running. And now let's see some additional information about this deployment. We're going to use the following command: kubectl describe deployment, and let's provide its name, which is nginx deployment. Nginx deployment. We can always use auto-completion in this particular command, as I have done in this case. So we see some additional information. The portions of this output can be gathered by using different commands, but in this particular output we see almost everything we can need to know about our particular deployment. We see its name, we see its namespace, we see the creation timestamp, we see the label which was provided in the deployment YAML file. We can see some annotations. Again, they are taken from the deployment file. The selector, the replicas information. We can always see the image which was used to deploy a particular container in this pod. Now we can actually see the list of events about this particular deployment. In this case, it said that it was scaled up replica set nginx deployment to 1 because it was specified in our deployment file as the number of replicas there was 1. Now let's verify this particular vSphere pod information from the vSphere perspective. Let's switch to our vSphere client in our browser. Now, under the hosts and clusters, in hosts and clusters navigation page, we can go to our SA Compute 01 cluster namespaces. Here we can see our namespace 01, and here we can find our nginx deployment with the same ID provided, which we have previously seen in our developer workstation CLI. So let's switch back to the vSphere client. We may need to select our namespace 01 and its monitor tab. If we choose the Kubernetes section in the events navigation pane, we can see some information about our newly created nginx deployment. It was created in this particular deployment. The nginx container was created and started. It was successfully, it has successfully mounted a volume, and it has successfully selected the image to deploy a particular container. If we choose our nginx deployment under the namespace section, we can see some additional information about this particular deployment and its pods and containers. So this object in vSphere Kubernetes pod that we have deployed using the kubectl CLI. And after that, our lab is completed. Congratulations, you have completed the deploying a container application that runs in a vSphere pod lab demonstration video. During this lab, we deployed a vSphere pod, and after that, we reviewed the deployed vSphere pod. Thank you for watching this lab demonstration video, and good luck as you continue your journey in VMware world.